Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of our Deconstructors Club, and I think we got a good one for you today. Just to let you know, because when we say Deconstructors Club, we're not excluding people. It's about inclusion, not exclusion. But why we're saying this is because we want to welcome people into this community that are specifically going through or have gone through or maybe thinking of deconstructing. I know that maybe family members, old church members, or, whoever else that is in your life that, we're a part of your circle of in evangelicalism are telling you you're just choosing this because you want to sin, or you're choosing this out of convenience. We all know how painful deconstruction is, and it's not a choice. It's something that happens to you, especially when you're seeing that your theology isn't matching up to experience. Or either you've been abused in church, and there's many reasons people deconstruct, but they're painful reasons, and a lot of times we feel alone, and we want to be there for you. That's what this whole podcast is about, in Deconstructors Club, and we want to be able to relate to that process that you're going through, and hopefully be help to you along the road. So with that being said, as I said in the beginning, I think this is going to be a really good episode because we have a special guest with us, and he's somebody that has experience in deconstructing in his, coming from his background of evangelicalism, and even, being in ministry and as a pastor, and he's going to talk more about his experience and his background. But I'm just really happy to introduce a good friend of mine to you, Johnathan Miller. Welcome, Johnathan, to our podcast.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate being here, the invitation. And so it's great to just sit. And Alex and I are old friends. We've been sitting for a pint and whiskey and talking about these issues for 5-6 years now. And so it's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to be here today.
Or even if you don't have to want to talk about anything, but a pint sounds really good to me anyway. But
a little early, but yeah.
I know. Tell us about your background and, your upbringing and your evangelical experience and how you got to where you got to.
Yeah, so I'm pretty steeped in evangelicalism for a lot of years. I grew up in the Assemblies of God organization, which is very evangelical, Pentecostal. Attended Bible college within the AG, North Central Bible College, now University in Minneapolis. I worked at Teen Challenge for 10 years until I was in my early 30s. And so I was a dean of men and then center director with Minnesota Teen Challenge. And I was deeply steeped in ministry and deeply steeped in that culture. I was raised in the Assemblies of God. It was also very toxic and very broken. And, I had a lot of trauma in my upbringing. I was always in church, but I had a father that had had multiple affairs with women in the church. And so he left when I was 3. I still saw him, but he was functionally had left the home. My mother remarries, and she remarries a man that is very abusive. And so I was just 5 years old when she married him. And he was an abusive Christian man. He claimed to be a Christ follower throughout his whole life. And so I lived with him and my mother while attending church for 13 years as a child. And so it was always, my faith in Jesus Christ is profoundly important to me. But it was always a challenge in the evangelical milieu. I was in this very evangelical context, but there was always a sense that maybe their theology didn't fit what I was going through and what my life experiences were, even as a young man. So I don't think the evangelical world has a theology for trauma, particularly trauma that maybe you didn't cause. I think we have a crisis theology. If someone's out there, with very serious addiction issues, they're causing a lot of problems, there may be criminal behavior. I think the evangelical world has an answer for that. Meet Jesus Christ, get transformed, get saved, great. When you've gone through childhood trauma, there is so much shame in the evangelical context. There is so much guilt. Those of us who grew up in it, those of us who've experienced it, we know that every Sunday could be an experience of, look at how bad you are, you need to repent. Look at how you've made, upset God, or you've saddened Jesus. Look at your behavior, put Christ on this cross. So as a child and even young adult, every time I went to church, it was a very painful thing. I remember feeling like, I was in all kinds of turmoil, and I would go to church on Sunday, and I would feel like this love of God they talk about, that must be for everyone else, but not me. Something is wrong with me and God cannot love me. Even in college, I would talk about, some of the issues, and I would be told, well, you can't have had a father that left. You said he was a Christian. Well, Christians can't do that. Now, I still had a relationship with my father. I still do care about him deeply. He now to this day has a very deep relationship with God. And so I would try and reconcile, yes, he did some profoundly bad things. And yes, he left our home, but he still has a faith. And so I would have to reconcile that Christians could do awful things. And that really wasn't a part of evangelical theology.
You said something about fake it till you make it. Do you ever make it?
Of course not. Of course not. I think that some within the evangelical world think they do. But spiritually, no, of course not. Because you can't fake, there is no faking the transformation of God in our souls. Mm-hmm. It's got to be complete. It's got to be just surrender. Recognizing God's love for us and God's love for all people is the most important thing. That can't be faked.
And that's always been the issue of that institution, authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Because authenticity is not this, view of perfection or this, and we were talking about that earlier. Sometimes the faking it is the actual making it.
It's what you're taught. It's right. The word wasn't fake it. The word was obedience.
Right.
So what was meant is fake it, but what the word that was used was obedience. If you're sincere, if you really believe, if you really love God, then this is what you will do. And so those of us who are sitting there listening to this at late high school, early 20s, we were under the impression that God's love was dependent. God's interest in me was dependent upon my ability to fake it, to perform.
Yeah.
And I was taught that sin, the lack of performance, affected God by him not being able to look at me. Mm-hmm. My sin prevented God from being able to love me, which is...
And again, it doesn't align to unconditional love.
It is the opposite of love.
Right.
And I thought at the time, though, they used proof text, they used scripture that proved it, but Johnathan, when you're speaking, I'm shaking over here, remembering my own early years, because what happened was you just never felt good enough for God's love. I wouldn't have said it back then. I would have just thought that I was just trying really hard to live up to what people were telling me. Yeah. But in the end, I began to feel the same sort of way. People don't see you, they see Jesus now. And I know that people didn't mean it in a bad way, but they probably never check to see how people were thinking about those words.
How were they feeling?
How were they feeling in that situation? For me, and here we are, random people meeting and talking. If the three of us were feeling those ways, how many other hundreds and thousands of people were feeling this? And the sad part about it is, many of them are still in that same kind of context, which is still as disrespectful.
So I'm 30 years old and it's a disaster. Now I'm outwardly a director at this point of a teen challenge in Duluth, Minnesota. I certainly look from the evangelical perspective incredibly successful. My marriage is a mess. I'm not physically abusive, but I'm certainly verbally abusive. I'm in 10,000 kinds of pain. I'm hurting, I'm upset. I can't go anywhere with it. I'm working for this organization that if you show any weakness, you are fired. It doesn't matter. I'm the director in the Duluth campus. It was rigid as could be. I fired so many people over 10 years. It's exhausting. And so you really couldn't reach out anywhere. And so I'm 30. I'm the director of this campus. My wife is all kinds of tied up in knots. She is in pain. She's angry at me. She's making statements like, this may not work. And if you know anything about my dear wife, Robin, she is the kind, she would be faithful forever. And so I could recognize I am just a mess. And I really recognized my marriage was in peril. I was trying to get help. And so I was starting to open up at this church to get help. And really, even the work experience was part of this. I had a very toxic boss. I had a executive director that could scream and yell, and that's just bringing back the same patterns of childhood. And so I recognized I had to change. There's a great, you guys have probably heard this, but there's a great phrase by Richard Rohr, the writer. He says, in your younger life, you, as a Christian, you think you're fighting the devil. You think you're fighting spiritual powers. And that's, evangelicalism loves that stuff. He's like, spirituality in the middle years of your life, you start to recognize you're not fighting the devil. You're fighting God. You're fighting yourself. You're fighting this question, does God really love me? So that was my 3-year question. Do I know that you love me? And it was walking through trauma, getting healing, getting counseling, both individually, even marital at times. But it was also wrestling with God and saying, do you love me? And coming on the other side of that, of yeah, and your love is transformative. And it is the air that I breathe.
I mean, that is so huge, because I think anybody who's a person of faith is going to have to deal with that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Jesus story is perfect, right? The story says that God's love never left Jesus, and yet Jesus still was crucified.